So, welcome everyone. We are really excited to be with you today and with Raymond Moody. Hello,
Yeah.
Dr. Raymond Moody.
Hello. Thank you so much, guys. This is really looking forward to this.
Yeah, and we're seeing on the chat column on the right-hand side, there's just like dozens of people signing in right now. Somebody there from Budapest, somebody else from Argentina, Portugal,
Wow.
Oregon, Phoenix, Florida.
Wow.
Yeah.
Going to Budapest next week, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, we go there quite a bit too.
Yeah.
So welcome everybody. There's somebody from South Africa. It's really beautiful. There's Yolanda. I think you're from Holland. Yeah. Netherlands, and there's somebody else from the Netherlands, Hungary. It's really spectacular, the fact that we can just connect with people around the world and to create together an amazing energetic field to bring through this information and so on. We're going to give people 2 or 3 minutes just so that everybody can sign in and join us. And as you can see, somebody from Hawaii there. Please let us know where you're coming from. Evergreen in Colorado, another person from Portugal. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, so we've been having thunderstorms here in Mount Shasta. I hear you're having storms in Alabama too, is that right?
We did a couple of days ago, but it's very nice today.
Yes. We can hear you well, but somehow your picture is frozen right now. But
we'll see that. Hopefully
okay.
It'll correct itself. Yeah,
there you go.
Back, so that's great.
It's just one of the nature of it's the nature of the internet. It doesn't matter how good your system is, just sometimes
yes, that's right.
It just freezes up. But we can hear you, and that's fine. And if that persists, then we'll
and
probably
sometimes I just freeze them too.
Good.
Hang on, I'm gonna go.
Okay. So, Julianne's disappearing. She's going to see if we can improve the transmission in some way. And look, there's somebody from Amsterdam there, and France. That's great. We don't usually have so many people checking in from France, but recently there's been a lot of French people joining us, and that's really wonderful.
Okay.
So I think we've given people a few minutes just to join us. So shall we officially start?
Yeah, let's begin.
Okay. So welcome everyone. My name's Pragit, and this is
I'm
Julianne, and we're from the Stargate Experience, and you can see a Stargate right behind us.
So we're really honored to be joined by Dr. Raymond Moody today, and we thought he's such a fun guy, actually, that we wanted him to introduce himself. Sorry, that's a lot of pressure, Raymond.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people have heard about your book, Life After Life, because it has such a compelling title. Mm-hmm. So maybe you'd like to say a little bit more about this incredible research you've been doing and who you are.
Well, basically, I guess my main point of identity to me is, of course, my kids and my grandkids. But in terms of what I do, I started out in philosophy, got a PhD in philosophy, and became a philosophy professor. My main areas of interest in that being logic and ancient Greek philosophy, which is really Greek philosophy is the most amazing story of history. It really is. And then I went to medical school and became a psychiatrist, and I did forensic psychiatry, working in a unit for the maximum security unit for the criminally insane with mass murderers and serial killers and such. And throughout my career, I have been fascinated with near-death experiences. I first learned about them from Plato in 1962, and then I heard a living person, Dr. George Ritchie, when I was 19 years old. And in 1965, I heard him talk about his experience. And subsequent to that time, I've talked with literally thousands of people from all over the world who have been to the brink of death and had this experience, which we've all heard about by now, of leaving their bodies and going through a passageway and so on. I was not a religious person at all as a kid, and I'm still not really religious per se, but so the idea of an afterlife was always very counterintuitive to me. It was, but just in the past few years, I've reached the point where I give up. I mean, there is an afterlife, in my opinion, and that I think that we are on to a whole new way of looking at this in the future, that there are new ways now to investigate this afterlife question. It's a very exciting time to live in for that particular area of interest.
So I've heard a lot about different experiences. Are there common characteristics of people that are having near-death experiences?
Well, there are, and one thing I sort of wanted to talk about too in terms of this is you guys are knowledgeable about channeling and so on, which has been sort of blank in my education. That's not something I know about, and I respect what you do and so on. And so I'm kind of thinking that since we'll be working together on this, that I'm thinking you guys are the source on the channeling, and what I can do here is to bring in background information on subjects like near-death experiences and reincarnation and the paranormal and the unusual anomalies of the mind and so on, that can enrich the viewers, you know, in terms of the understanding and so on. So I think this is a great colleagueship here.
Yeah. So we're really excited about this collaboration with you.
Me too.
You bring such a grounded, research-driven approach to looking at these big questions. And what we do with the Stargate is pure expansion of consciousness, and
that's right,
into practical. A space. Yeah, it's practical in its own way, but it's far out. And,
yes,
and we are so honored that you're here with us. And
I'm just delighted for this.
And for the people that are watching this, Raymond hasn't experienced Alcazar yet, so he's very courageous.
Right. Indeed, yeah, that is courageous.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
So I just have had a great time chatting with you two, and looking forward to working on this. You were asking about, in effect, the people who have these experiences. It's universal. I've talked with people from all over the world who've had these near-death experiences, from all kinds of different cultures, all different kinds of personality types, and world over we hear very similar things from people, that when their heart stops beating, they say that they leave their physical bodies, and they're looking around, and they become aware that that even though they can understand perfectly what the doctor and nurse are saying down below, that they're watching the scene from a point of view up above, and they can it's not like they hear a voice, but they can understand perfectly what the doctors and nurses are thinking about. And but when they try to communicate in turn to ask, how can it be that I'm out of my body like this, nobody seems to be able to hear them or to see them. So they become aware that this is something to do with death, and people tell us that they go through a passageway of some sort. They compare it to a tunnel. They come out on the other side into an incredibly beautiful and bright, brilliant light of love and comfort. And so no matter how long they've lived, that there's just no words to describe this, that it's something that transcends our ability in ordinary words to describe it. But they say that in that light, that relatives and friends of theirs who have already passed away are there almost as a greeting committee to help them through this transition. And
we've heard that too.
Yeah, and they undergo, most interestingly to me, is the panoramic memory. They say that every single detail of their lives is projected around them instantly, because there's no time. Time stops, stands still. They see everything they've ever done in their lives, every action, not from the point of view that they had when they did the action, but rather from looking at it through the eyes and feelings of those with whom they've interacted. So this is very powerful motivator for people. They say that if you see yourself doing something unkind to somebody, then in this review, you are that person. You feel the hurt directly. And or if you see yourself doing a kind-hearted action, you feel the good feelings that you
I'm getting goosebumps as you say that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That
you know,
really
I've
is
heard
amazing,
thousands of them, and every one of them is fresh. It's
Wow.
like, I just heard thousands of stories, and at the same time, I can't wait to hear the next one. And at the same time, I think we're into a new era now where we have the concepts that will enable us to put this together. And to me, it's not out of the question that we could have a rational proof of an afterlife.
Well, I think leading edge science is actually moving in that direction. Certainly not mainland science, who still deny that, but there's definitely a leading edge culture that's investigating very seriously that. So what would you say the effects that this near-death experience has on people when they actually come back into their body and find themselves they're still alive?
Well, you know, as a psychiatrist, one of the first things that impressed me when I started dealing with patients was I kind of woke up to the fact that everybody is chasing something. I had all these patients, some of them seemed to be chasing money, some of them seemed to chase power, some of them fame or whatever. And I was so astonished by this because I kept thinking, I'm not chasing anything. Like, why are people motivated by this? So I finally got around to bringing up my wonderful insight to my supervisor, John Buckman, and I made this observation. I just don't get it, John. You know, these people chasing power or fame or money or whatever, what an awful life it must be to be chasing something. So John smiled and he said, now, how old were you when you finished your second doctoral degree, Raymond? And I said, 31. Woke up, oh yeah, I've spent my life chasing knowledge, right? Well, but what I noticed about this is that after this experience, whatever they had been chasing before, people say that what they learned from this experience is that what this life is all about is learning to love. Because that's what came out in their life review. That because when they saw scenes that they had been acting lovingly, then they felt good. But if they see things where they were unkind to people, then they felt the consequences. But also it gives people that desire and that goal, but it doesn't transform them in a way that enables them to achieve that goal. Because, the way I like to say it, they usually say it in some kind-hearted way, but the way I say it is, let's face it, it's very hard to get through the average day without wanting to choke at least one person. Right? That's the fact of life. And that doesn't change. People say that's still there, and you have the terrible thoughts about people walking down the street, and but they do. I've observed enough thousands of people, but they really do try to get their act straight. And with the limitation, they realize all along that it's humanity that we're dealing with. Yeah. And another thing they say is that they have absolutely no more fear of death, because this experience to them, it was completely convincing that what we call death is a transition to some other reality. And then another thing that happens once in a while is that people are inspired by their near-death experience to study. I've had a lot of people who say that as soon as they got out of the hospital or whatever, they trotted down to the local junior college to sign up to take courses, because they said that a lot of people have told me that when this life review, it's often in a company with this being of complete love and compassion who knows everything about you and is helping you with this review. And they say that when scenes emerge in which they had been learning something, there's a kind of slowing and a focus on that. And a lot of people have told me that this being says, in effect, not in words, but that the thought comes that even after you die, this process of learning goes on, apparently for eternity. And then another thing is artistic inspiration. So once in a while you meet somebody who's never once been interested in art, but are inspired by their near-death experience to become artists, visual artists. Right now in New York, there's this wonderful man, Anthony Cicoria, and these are Anthony's qualifications: a PhD in physiology, an MD degree, and a professor of orthopedic surgery at New York University. Well, in 1996, Anthony was hit by a bolt of lightning in his neck.
Whoa.
Had a cardiac arrest at a family reunion and had this amazing experience. And afterward, even though he had never been interested in music before, he developed an interest in the piano. He kept having a recurrent dream in which he was playing on a concert stage, playing the same music. And so he learned how to transcribe music, to transcribe this piece, and started taking piano lessons. And now, in addition to a renowned professor of orthopedic surgery, he's a concert pianist. These experiences have very real effects on people, all kinds of effects.
Wow, that's amazing.
That is really amazing.
We're having a little trouble with the sound here, and again, I don't know whether it's this whole process or whether it's just our individual thing.
Well, I think it's actually the sound is coming through for the most part. The video is freezing a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll just carry on.
Yeah, and people are asking if there's going to be time for questions, and there will be. So go ahead and as your questions come up, type them in, and we'll have them flagged as questions.
I've got another question, Raymond. So these near-death experiences, would you say that that's actual evidence of an afterlife?
No, and thank you for that question, because, I mean, as a logician, I can tell you that the question is not, with life after death, it's not the question of if it's evidence or not, but what would we mean by evidence in this context? That's the real, it's more of a philosophical difficulty than, because the real problem is the concept, right? It's like the idea of an afterlife may bring up beautiful images to our mind, but in terms of putting it down into something that could be verified or whatever, that's a hard thing to do. What I would say is, without in any way trying to persuade anybody else of this or whatever, but just for what information it's worth, is that I myself have reached the point where I give up. I think it is an afterlife. And now we have to do is work out the concepts that enable us to bring this into the rational worldview. I could give you lots and lots and lots of stories, but this one that comes to my mind, why I finally reached the point where I just had to give up. But there are many cases like this. But, for example, some years ago, I was in Italy, and after my lecture on near-death experiences, a surgeon came up, and you could tell from his face that he had been affected by something that happened to him, not in an unpleasant way, but he was just obviously astonished. So he led me back to the corner of the auditorium and told me about how in some months before he had been doing an elective operation. It was not a serious illness, but an elective operation on a fairly young man who was in overall good health. So there was no thought that anything untoward might happen during the surgery, but in the actual event, the patient had a cardiac arrest and the surgeon wasn't able to revive him. So he was just beside himself. He was, how did this happen? And what am I going to tell the family? And whereupon he said the operating room door swung open and a woman came yelling in. He said at first he thought this woman was psychotic. And you know how when you're under stress, you have a hard time understanding anyway what somebody's saying to you, right? So he said he literally had to stare into this woman's face to figure out what is it she's saying. And he said he realized she was saying, "My husband is not dead." She said, "I was out in the waiting area and my husband came to me and he said that you think he's dead. So I should come in here and tell you that he's not dead." And the surgeon told me he doesn't even remember the resuscitation, but he did. And sure enough, after a while, the guy's heart started beating again. And so he said he was there in the recovery room when the patient regained consciousness. And the first thing the patient said to him was, "I was out of my up there looking at you down there, and I could tell you thought I was dead, but I kept trying to tell you I'm not dead, I'm not dead. But you wouldn't hear me, so I went out into the waiting area and I tried to tell my wife to come in here and tell you that I'm not dead." Now, I could give you a half a dozen other stories like that where the physicians involved have empathically co-participated in the near-death experience of the patient. And I give up. That takes it outside of the category of brain damage, right? Yeah. If the explanation of these things is going to be that cardiac arrest, there's oxygen deprivation to the brain and it creates the near-death experience, then how do you account for the experience of the bystander who was not ill or injured, but who participated in the near-death experience of the patient?
So how does that, what do actually people that are right there with the person having the NDE, what do they experience? If you say it's a shared experience, what's their experience?
Well, people with shared death experiences happen to a bystander at the death of someone else. But the shared death experiences include all the elements that we think of the near-death experience, except the person is not ill or injured. It's just that they're standing there with somebody who is dying. And among the things the bystanders say, and I hear this from all the time from people, is that as the patient, as it often is of the doctor, or the loved one who is there with the dying person, that the bystander often tells us that they see something leave the body at the point of death. Mm-hmm. They say they have this very hard time to describing this. It's I've heard it described as a sort of vaguely globular light, but with a very complex structure inside of it, like a golden or grayish light. Then it's also fairly common, I hear people that at the bedside say that as grandma died or whoever, that the bystanders themselves say that they leave physical bodies and they go with this light with the dying loved one. Or the bystanders will say that they see apparitions of the dying loved one's deceased relatives come in the room as though to take them away. Or the room fills with light. Or people tell me all the time that during the dying process, the geometry of the room changes, that they realize that they're no longer in a three-dimensional geometry, but rather in some other kind of geometrical arrangement. I hear people say things like, for example, that they became aware that they were viewing the room from an impossible angle. Or they say that the room with light, and most incredibly of all, and this one is, this is the single most shocking thing I've discovered from my work with near-death experiences.
Wow.
is it also occurs that bystanders at the death of someone else will sometimes empathically co-live the dying life review of the person who passes away. And I see the shock on your face, Julianne. I still feel that shock too, because to tell you the truth, I'm not looking forward to sitting in on my own life review, much less the idea there could be a spectator, right? Like pass the popcorn or something. And that is shocking to me. And you would think it would be very embarrassing. But actually, the people I have talked with say that it's not really embarrassing at all, because I learned as a psychiatrist that, you know, pretty much people may spend 6 weeks with you and doing psychotherapy like a couple of times a week before they'll finally get around to their deep, dark secret, right? Well, I quickly learned as a psychotherapist that pretty much everybody has the same secrets, these deep, dark things that it may take us a month to get up the courage to divulge to the psychotherapist. Well, the psychotherapist has probably heard that very one 3 or 4 times that week. That's how it works. So this isn't as shocking in one way if you think about it, but it's still just very, I don't like the idea of somebody else sitting in on my life review. Now, you would think that this is just people who are close to the loved one, right? Like it would be a relative or a close friend or whatever. And I at first thought that must be what it was, but then finally I got one several years ago from a physician who was called to the ER to resuscitate a patient he had never laid eyes on. But as he was trying to resuscitate this man, he said, like, these images, apparently from this man's life, just zoomed all around him. He saw the life of this man unfold around him. And something really weird is going on. And to try to, in 2018, to try to think of this in terms of oxygen deprivation to the brain, that's passé. We're past that now. This is something else is going on that's very important.
Yeah, I think Alxar's going to have a lot to say about this a little bit later when he comes in.
And I think once you go beyond the skeptics' questions, you start to illuminate the truly fascinating questions, right?
Well, that word skeptic, it's interesting. I bet a lot of people watching us right now have heard somebody say to them about, oh, I'm skeptical about these near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain, or I'm a skeptic about apparitions of the deceased. I just think it's wishful thinking. Well, I can tell you, my main interest really is ancient Greek philosophy. And the skeptics were a movement of the ancient Greek philosophers that occurred after Aristotle. The founder of them was a guy named Pyrrho. Pyrrho the skeptic. Well, the people who say things like, oh, I'm a skeptic about near-death experiences, I think it's just the chemistry of the brain, are betraying by that very sentence that they're completely ignorant of what skepticism is. Because what the skeptical philosophy is that they were experts in logic. They came down after Aristotle codified logic, so they knew that very well. But their thought was, well, if you think of logic as a code for going through rules and procedures that enable you to draw a conclusion, what the skeptics said is, well, what if we don't draw a conclusion? Like, what if we really apply and we bear down, we ask every question, we inquire as much as we can, but in the end, the purpose of skepticism is to refrain from drawing a conclusion. That's what it means. Because it was mind-opening. Number one, it expands your mind, but also, since everybody else is rushing in this direction to get the conclusion, if your technique is to withhold a conclusion, then that opens your peripheral vision, and you see side pathways of inquiry that everybody else has missed because they're driving toward the conclusion. So if now you run that back through your mind, I'm a skeptic about near-death experiences. I think it's just the chemistry of the brain. When you unpack what that person just said, it's, I'm a person who doesn't draw conclusions, and my conclusion is such and such. So sadly for them, the people who falsely characterize themselves as skeptics are better known in my vocabulary as ignoramuses, because they don't even want to research the wonderful founder of this movement, and they profane the word skeptic by using it in that inaccurate sense.
I think you have an understanding there that most people don't have.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, I think, should read on ancient Greek philosophy. It's the most interesting story of history.
Ah, but that's your search for knowledge, you see. People are searching for other things. So a lot of people have been asking questions. So I just want to say again, we'll be taking questions at the end. So it's fine just to write them in, but don't expect them to be answered right away. We'll take those at the end.
Okay, so we have this other question, which is, do people see God or meet God during their near-death experiences? And what does God look or act like?
Well, yes. Many people during their near-death experience meet some entity, and often in connection with their life review. They say this entity, with complete compassion, sort of helps them through this review. And some people call it God. It's people who are Christian often say Christ. People who are Jewish often say God or an angel. And I've talked with people from all around the world who say this, that there simply aren't any words in their vocabulary to put a name to this, but that God is an okay designation, that you meet this completely personal being who knows everything about you and is not judging you in a harsh way, as you often are judging yourself. And that helps them through this review to understand themselves in a new way. So the view of God I have come up with from my encounter with all the people with near-death experiences is I'm writing a book on it actually now called God is Bigger Than the Bible. I think that that God is someone who bursts out of the boundaries of all the different religions, I think. And it's often manifested in terms of people say, I have to say a light or love, because there are no words, but that people say like this completely brilliant light of love and comfort and peace, who has complete knowledge about you and is loving to you.
It's totally fascinating.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Makes you look forward to the passing into the next realm.
You know, I am ready. I'm 73 now. I mean, thing about being 73 is you know exactly why you're here. I've got two wonderful grown sons, but they're on their own. Like, you know, they're in their professions on. Got a wonderful grandson, and he's got his parents. And I have two wonderful kids adopted at birth. Carter is now 19, and Carol Ann is 17. Carter is Mexican-American by heritage, and Carol Ann is a Blackfeet Native American Indian from Montana who has all the traits of her people. I tell you, this is an assertive kid. And we adopted them at the moment of birth, and I'm really very aware that why I need to be here is for these kids. And with each step where I am, Pragit, on it, is that I am ready to go, because I don't want to get trapped in that scenario with the machines and the wires and the tubes all around me. I see how that happens. Plus, I have to be out walking every day. It's like it's not a virtue, it's an addiction from my exercise. So it's true. It's like where I've reached with this near-death experiences, and I'm ready to go, but I see very clearly why I want to stay for the time being for these kids to get a little older. But I'm looking forward to it. It's like an adventure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
No pain though.
Yeah.
Pain is a bad one. I pray every day. No pain in the process, but painless, peaceful, and pleasant death.
It absolutely can be. And I think it's your intention that actually creates the reality of the experience. And for those people that are hanging on, a fear of death, which many of the religions actually create, it's that fear of death that leads to that long, drawn-out process, or there's still an understanding about life that they need to gather while they're still in the body that allows them to maintain some level of life here in the hospital with those tubes. Because I think a lot of people...
That's right. I'm talking just personally here.
Yeah.
I think I can imagine a kind of person who would regard that as a kind of adventure too, right?
Yeah.
To see things from that side.
Well, it's also to complete things sometimes. I think sometimes when people find themselves in that, what feels like a helpless state, then they're open to actually receive help. And sometimes
it's so true. When I went to medical school, I was already known for this work on near-death experiences. But at that time, people didn't talk about death. So when I started going as a medical student on the wards, I noticed that I was getting all of the terminally ill patients, right? Because the doctors, but it was so interesting, the doctors were not comfortable in going to me and saying, Ray, because of your interest, I'm going to give you the terminally ill patients. They weren't even that comfortable even to get up to that, right? Because people just didn't talk about it. But that was a great blessing to me because I've been with so many people as they passed away. And it's really fascinating to see that very often at the end, even if they have been obtunded for weeks, it's sometimes they come back to life. It looks like they've got, one man described it, one foot on the other side, right? And they become very lucid and they light up with the light and they can tell everybody in the room very articulately something. And then they just collapse and die. It's amazing.
Well, I had an interesting experience with my brother. He was dying of cancer, and I went to be with him for the last days. And actually, I was prevented from getting there earlier by the job that I had at the time. And so he was literally hanging on. He kept on asking, "Is Prageet going to be there?
Yes.
Is he here yet?
Yes.
Is he here yet?"
Yes.
Yes. And so when I finally got there, I was lying on the bed with him, and he just kind of went off into a deep sleep. But it was actually far more than that. I could feel there was an incredible stillness in the room. And then after a while, he came back and he said, "The angel said, you can't come all the way with me." And for me, it was such a wonderful heart opening that already, even though he was still here physically, he'd already connected with the angels. And so I think people go through that opening, that receptivity.
They do. They do. It just, to me, it seems to a fact of observation that in the dying process, many people, whether you want to think of it as a state or a place or a domain of consciousness, you can actually see people kind of flip over to whatever you want to call it, another dimension or whatever. You see their consciousness gets amplified.
Right.
And and so to me, that's just an observation of experience, that moment. And I do think that we have techniques now where, assuming that there is a cross-dimensional experience during the dying process, that you go over to another dimension of reality or state of existence. I think we have techniques now where we can actually detect where that is. As I said, it's not in the way that people have been thinking about. It's like, I think that I am not a parapsychologist. In 2018, for somebody to say that there can be scientific evidence of an afterlife, that's not a right thing to say. And somebody who says that, it's irresponsible, because the question of life after death is the most important question of existence, in my opinion. And it's not yet a scientific question. It's still a philosophical question. So we're not going to be able to solve this one by a scientific experiment. First thing we got to do is to think through new concepts of how you investigate this, and that's done now. My book on this is published in France, at least, and hopefully will be in the U.S. But I'm just going to go ahead and say it. There are new ways to look at this where we really can do actual, serious, rigorous investigations of the question of life after death from a purely rational technique. We can. That's possible.
Great. Fascinating.
And that's a beautiful thing, because so much of the progress that we've made as humanity is to lay this paradigm of rationality.
Right? Yeah, and you know, Julianne, it's interesting because the difference between the afterlife question and the other kinds of questions that we're all very interested in is that the afterlife question, along with a few other questions, I think, for example, the question of, are there sentient life in outer space, and the question of life after death, and a few other big questions, we can't solve them with the mind we have and the logic we have. Exactly. And in the past, that reality of your fellow countryman, David Hume, Prageet, is, well, he was a little north of you, but up in that area. And Hume said it very brilliant. The fact is, he lived in the 18th century and was a friend of Ben Franklin's, but he was... he said it just very accurately. He said that by the mere light of reason, it seems difficult to prove the immortality of the soul. Some new species of logic is required for that purpose, and some new faculties of the mind that they may enable us to comprehend that logic. And that is an accurate saying. It's always been thought that what that means is that it's impossible. But I say, and I am claiming here and now, that that criterion has been fulfilled. We do now have new logical principles and that open up new faculties of our mind that are enabling us to think about this in a whole new way. I mean, this sounds abstract, but this is really, it's already happened. So we have entirely new ways now to look at this.
So this is a fascinating culmination where we've just entered to, and we're looking forward to exploring that more with you, Dr. Moody. It seems like a brilliant segue into actually something completely different, which is to ask our guide, Alcazar, for his perspective, because he actually has something very similar that he says. He says, humanity cannot evolve much further using the mind alone. I guess it's very different. It's time for you to access your super consciousness. So
yeah, that fits. Yeah, I think that when we expand our intellectual mind, it leads to a higher state of consciousness. It does. It has in the past.
Absolutely.
The guy who invented deductive logic received it in a vision in the other world. That was in 500 BC. So there is lots of precedence for spiritual experiences leading to logical advances.
That's amazing. I did not know that. Wow. So it looks like Prageet's ready to bring Alcazar through.
Indeed. And so, beloved ones, we greet thee 'tis Alcazar. And as we have said previously, it is a great honor to be with this one, Dr. Raymond Moody, for he is a pioneer in breaking down the rigid forms that your minds and your societies have clinged on to for too long. So, the question, is there life after death? We would say this is the wrong question. For life as consciousness is a continuum. You do not die. You simply move from one reality to another. The consciousness at birth, or actually whilst you are in the womb, comes into the physical body. Your consciousness inhabits, learns, experiences this physical dimension through this body. And then at a certain point when you are ready, you drop the body and you move back into that which we call the quantum field, where you exist as a beingness, a consciousness, a formless consciousness. It is important to understand that your mind is a third dimensional reality. Your brain-mind mechanism functions in this third dimension. Therefore, everything that the mind perceives is perceived in a linear way. We would say you are not the body, you are consciousness. In fact, you are what we call a super conscious being. A small part of this super consciousness right now is in the physical body. And your intuition is the link between your super consciousness and your human consciousness, which is the same thing, a small part being in the humanness. But because of your conditioning, because of the way that you have learned in this 3D reality, you are separate from the super consciousness. It appears that you are separate from your super consciousness. What is occurring now on your earth is that consciousness itself is changing. Human consciousness overall is beginning to expand. It is important to understand as a baseline that consciousness has always been. You as a consciousness have always been and always will be. In the same way that many people have experienced what you are calling near-death experiences, many people have also experienced reconnecting or re-experiencing past life. So they are connecting back with their consciousness, not to what happens when the body is dropped, but connecting back to what they have experienced in other lifetimes prior to this. So all these things are part of the awakening of humanity, if you wish to see it like that. There is a vast reality in this universe. And as Dr. Moody briefly mentioned, perhaps there is other civilizations out there in the universe. In fact, there is. And they are ready to communicate. In fact, they are already communicating with those individuals who are open to that possibility. In order to be open to these different things, one has to relax the mind and the belief systems that your society has conditioned you with. If you are willing to think out of the box, as people like to say, if you are willing to allow for the possibility, and this is a beautiful phrase that we use a lot, if you are open to allow for the possibility then experiences can start to happen for you. So, people talk about meeting this being. You have heard of this in different ways. What is this? Again, we have to say that it is the way your mind interprets the experience. And Dr. Moody has, in a sense, touched on this already. Some people see angels. Some people see their family, deceased family that has gone on before them. Other people just see a light. It depends on how your mind expects, or how your mind is conditioned, how you interpret the experience of the near-death reality. So, it is your consciousness that is moving out of the body for a short time to have this experience of the beyond and then the return. So, what is the reason? What is the purpose of this? It is different for each individual. Overall, however, the purpose is to begin to make humanity aware that there is far more than just this one lifetime, just this physical body. Many of your religions like to tell you that you have this one lifetime and you have to behave correctly, otherwise you will go to this place called hell. This is not the case. The experience of this third dimensional reality is just that. Your superconsciousness wants to have an experience of being physical, wants to be on this beautiful planet, wants to interact with it, wants to experience breathing the air, seeing the wonder from a totally different place of being in the body. And as you have heard, some people in this near-death experience, or close to those and sharing this near-death experience, they see this 3D reality in a totally different way. And let us say this, which will be a challenge for some people's minds, but it is beginning to be seen by some in your scientific community that this earthly experience is far different than you have imagined. That these bodies can be viewed as an avatar. So we are referring to the games that are available in your computer systems, where you create an avatar, a body, a person in this game, and you give them certain abilities, and you play the game with other people. There are serious scientists considering that perhaps this world is like a massive computer game. These bodies are avatars for your superconsciousness. And in fact, there are universities who study this. You can actually go to university to study this as a potential. This is indeed thinking out of the box. So, let us say a few more things about people's experiences. You have heard that people review their life. Then they feel not only their own feelings, but they feel the experiences of those who they relate to. The pleasant experiences, the unpleasant experiences. Why is this happening? It is to give this human aspect an awareness of their impact on the rest of the world. Why? So now we have to introduce another concept, another idea. All of humanity are energetically connected by what we call the morphic field. And there has been scientific investigation into this also. It is an energetic field that connects you on a subconscious level with everyone else. And so as individuals learn, they open the doorway for further research exploration by other people. And so when somebody has this experience of looking at their life and feeling the impact that their actions have had on other people, it brings in compassion. It brings in a deeper realization that we are all connected, that we are not isolated and alone, that we function together, we create together. And so this experience that an individual has is brought back into their body, into their life. And then it allows that feeling, that experience to be shared into the morphic field with the rest of humanity, allowing other people to start to have that understanding without them necessarily having to have what you call this near-death experience. So we have said a few things, and we would invite Dr. Moody perhaps to make a comment on some of the things that we have said, because this indeed is a very different perspective from the logical, physical way of looking at what is occurring. So we invite you to comment.
Yes, what I responded to there mostly is actually, even when I was a fairly young person, I had figured out that what seems is not what is. I have always been kind of on board with this idea that this is a what they're now putting it as a simulate, and Plato was onto that very image. His famous allegory was the allegory of the cave, and mentioned that people were raised down in a cavern, constrained so that they could only see the back wall of the cavern, and saw shadows projected on the wall by a fire and objects being held in front of a wall which would project these shadows. So his point was that people who lived in that environment would accept it as reality. And then he tries to imagine, what if we could liberate one of these people and drag them up to the light, what their experience would be. So yeah, I'm content with this. Where I have come on this is I think of it like a drama or a play. It's I did geriatric psychiatry for a year before I went into forensics, and I constantly heard from my patients who were cognitively sharp, but they were just there for some situational thing, and constantly heard them reflect that the older you get, the more it seems when you look back in life, it's been a kind of play or a drama or a script. I heard the famous of Campbell, the mythologist, say that very thing, and I've heard it from a lot of patients, and I also see it now for myself at this age, that life does have a dramatical structure. Right? The Hindus said that this is like a play, and I've had a lot of actors and actresses over the years who had near-death experiences, and several of them have used the same metaphor. It's one woman who's actually, she was quite famous, but it's still, this is a confidentiality. She was famous for a role, a certain role in Broadway, I guess it was, and then she finally retired from that role, and she told me that during her near-death experience, she said the best way she could describe the feeling she had when she was leaving her body was to go back to that night that she had played that role for the last time and stepped off the stage, and leaving that role behind. She said that was very comparable to how it felt in her near-death experience, that she was leaving the role she had played in life behind and going to another realm of life. So I think it's that Hindu analogy of the theater. I think that's very accurate. It's also, I think, very accurate.
Yeah.
You might think at first it's kind of a figure of speech or a metaphor, but because you say, well, you've taken one area of the human experience, namely the theater, and you're projecting that out as the whole, and that's a fallacy. But I think it happened the other way around. I think the reason we have theater is that people had that insight about how when you reach a certain age, your life seems like a play, and that we just happen to have very brilliant people like Thespis and Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides who were able to take that insight and I think the reason people respond to the theater as they do is that it's a model of what our life is like. It's kind of a drama. You have the beginning and the middle and the end, and then you walk off the stage. Then you go on to another assignment. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that image. Actually, when I was like a young kid, like a teenager maybe, I remember looking in the mirror one day, and it was as if I had this higher self kind of realization of like all these different roles I've played, and this is just one of them.
Yeah.
I couldn't see my past.
Mirrors are spiritual instruments too. I think in Japan, you know, that you give the young woman a mirror, I think when she's 12 years old or something. It's a very ceremonial occasion when they get the young women, when they get their first mirror.
Wow.
That's beautiful. So in a few moments, we're going to move on to the questions and answers. There have been a lot of really great questions coming in. So thank you, everyone who's listening. Right. And before we do that, we want to move a little bit into an invitation for you guys to take this dual perspective that Raymond Moody sharing his knowledge and expertise from this beautiful rational framework, and the Stargate experience and Alcazar bringing in the channeled perspective on the same topics. So I know that there was a question about what this metal structure is behind us and why is it here? What does it do? So we'll talk very briefly. We'll say this is called a Stargate, and its whole function is actually to anchor an energy field that can very, very easily surround people in a high vibrational energetic field. And this works even for people who are listening online, because this energy is very special. It's actually multidimensional. So essentially what happens is it allows you to expand your awareness very quickly and easily. So in this deeper exploration, what we will be doing is actually inviting people to move into energy meditations that help you reach into expanded states of consciousness. And I should say that with the Stargate work, we never know what's going to happen. It's always an in-the-moment response to the elements that are being brought up and to the people who are called to be here. So this is a little bit about the series that we're going to be creating, and we're so honored to have Raymond bringing his expertise into this series. So that said, we will share a link with you guys to learn more information and to, if you wish, to go deeper into this collaboration. But for now, we'll go into the questions and answers.
So Ashley has been monitoring some of the questions, and we're going to ask her if she could read them out, or one of them out anyway, and then we'll start responding to some of them. We're not going to have the time to respond to all the questions, but after this we'll go through, take a look at them, and maybe almost as a bonus to the series, we will have a recording of the answers to some of these questions that we won't get to today. Okay, so Ashley is off camera, but you'll be able to hear her voice. So what's the first question that you've selected for us?
Hello, everybody. The first question is about ETs. A couple people have asked about it, asking, are there extraterrestrials waiting for us on the other side? And are there bad ones waiting for us?
Well, my answer is I don't know. However, I can, it's something I've thought a lot about. And because actually, I didn't wake up to the afterlife question until I was 18 years old. I first encountered it in Plato. But I was a devotee of astronomy from the age of 7 or 8. And obviously, when you start thinking like that, the question arises, are there sentient beings on other planets? Well, there is no rational way of really framing the answer to that. However, what I would say about it is this, that the latest count of most accurate count of the number of stars in the known universe has been done a few years ago, and it's roughly on the order of 150 billion trillion stars out there. Now, and the Kepler telescope is making us aware that apparently planets are around every star. It's just part of the process. But let's say that the sun is unusual in having 8 and that the average star has only 4. Now, the likelihood is that the sun is about in the middle of the bell curve, right? So that we're probably about average. But let's just be conservative and say that it's 4 planets on the average per star. That makes 600 billion trillion planets. And the latest data from the Kepler is that about 1 out of 1,000 of them is Earth-like. And that means that there's on the order of 1 billion trillion Earth-like planets.
Wow.
Now, the idea that our Earth is the only planet where life, I mean, it's absurd. It's crazy to say that it is, and it's crazy to say that it isn't. But I think to me, it's far crazier to say that it isn't. So I'm expecting this. However, there are big problems arise, like how would we communicate with an intelligence that is far superior? You know, there's big questions. I think in 2018, we think of the afterlife question and the question of extraterrestrial civilizations as distinct questions. But if you go back just 200 years, they were the same question. In England, when the realization was dawning on people that apparently those smudges that they couldn't see with their telescopes because the resolution wasn't good enough were galaxies. Then people woke up to the fact that, well, there's other beings out there. And a man named Chalmers, Chalmers, who was at Cambridge or Oxford, I forget which, but he knew about astronomy, but also was a theologian. And he wrote this series of books which were wildly popular on both sides of the Atlantic, because they had to come up with some explanation in terms of the Bible for all these other planets, right? So what Chalmers proposed is that the planets out there are the abode of our deceased ancestors, which is one that to us is very counterintuitive, but it took the England and America by surprise, and it was a major phenomenon in his books, and people on both sides of Atlantic sort of took that as what they thought at that time. So they're very closely connected questions. And the question you raise is whether people who are in the afterlife have a direct access to the other civilizations and so on. I've heard a couple of people say, yeah, including the finest person I ever knew was Dr. George Ritchie. And George was the first living person I heard a near-death experience from. And George said absolutely that where he was, he said he saw into this realm which consisted of institution of higher learning, that people there were just learning and committed themselves to the pursuit of knowledge. And he said he was in one area of this institution that was kind of like a library, and in one section of the library, he said it was the holy books of the universe. So I think that it wouldn't be surprised at all if, to me, ultimately there's a kind of merging of the afterlife question and the question of extraterrestrial life.
So let's give Alcazar's perspective, because those people that are familiar with the Stargate, we communicate with these beings, the Pleiadians, for example, and the Arcturans and the Hathors. These races are highly evolved beings, and they have existed within the universe for literally billions and billions of years. And in fact, humanity is the youngest, still struggling to become more conscious. And what we're doing with the Stargate work, or one aspect of it, is to start to connect people with these other very benevolent beings. We call them ETs, extraterrestrials, from a very kind of human point of view, but we're all living together in this vast universe.
So what our guide Alcazar said about these, like the Pleiadians are the most commonly known in the New Age spirituality as extraterrestrial beings of light who are actually highly conscious. And what our guide says about them is that their entire planetary civilization became enlightened over 1 million of our Earth years ago and have continued to evolve since then. So if the question is, are we eternal beings? And the answer turns out to be yes, then it would make sense that there are highly, highly evolved conscious beings in the universe. And of course, this is pretty much the polar opposite of a rational approach to this question. The whole way that the Stargate came through was through a spontaneous channeling that Prageet had, which he started to trust because he got confirmation. So this is a purely intuitive approach.
And for those that don't know the Stargate or my history, I was actually taken up onto a ship.
Out of body.
Out of body, which was, out of body is another way of saying just your consciousness, your awareness going to a certain place, which is very similar to the near-death experience. The consciousness is leaving the body. So I had this experience, and that changed my whole reality. And of course, those people that are aware of the numerous sightings of different spacecraft that have happened over the many, many years, from very responsible people in society, like airline pilots and police and the various armed forces and so on, who are tended to be respected more than the sort of average Joe. There's incredible evidence about this, and Alcazar's talked about it a lot, about there being more and more evidence of other civilizations gently trying to introduce themselves to us. And so people have asked, well, scientists have been looking for intelligent life out there in the universe for many, many years. All kinds of big telescopes and things are being used, and different dishes and so on. And so why haven't we found them? And Alcazar's answer is because you're looking in the third dimension. You're still looking in the physical because your mind is so focused on the physical dimension. You're not opening up to look at the higher realities.
So to bring it back to that question, I think it would depend on whether, if you have a near-death experience or if you're dying, if you're going to meet any kind of other civilization or extraterrestrial, would depend on whether you're personally open to that. And I would think that it's actually kind of rare, because I would think that it would be more of your personal connections that would kind of chauffeur you to that other reality.
Yeah. Cool. So we have another question.
Yeah, and we're got about 15 minutes left on the. Okay.
Jorge's written in that I have the intuition that there is life after death, but something bothers me. How is it possible that our consciousness survives our brain when we die, and at the same time we don't remember having had consciousness before our brain is born?
Well, that's a good question. Would you like to start?
Yeah. What I would say is I don't have the faith in the existence of the brain that you do. Before I went to medical school, as I said, I got my PhD in philosophy. To me, the problem, what is the relationship between the physical brain and the consciousness? And there's all kinds of different points of view, but the way where I still take this is that the primary reality is consciousness and ideas. That's the reality. It's kind of realized that the external physical world could just be a product of the recurrences in your conscious experience, right? And time and space are involved in this. Immanuel Kant and really pointed out that we do make a wrong assumption when we think that space and time are out there. Space and time are they are structures of our consciousness that make an experience of this physical world possible is what they are. So to try to think in terms of space and time outside of this framework that we're in I don't think it's, people with near-death experiences tell me that time and space, there's
They don't.
other side that don't exist. It's just a different framework. But it's very puzzling when you try to put these two together we naturally try to think of it as spatial and temporal, but it's not. So that's what I would say. Yeah. But so the primary reality is consciousness.
The way Alcazar describes it is that the reality, the greater reality, is what he calls the quantum field. And scientists are beginning just to explore that. But the quantum field holds everything. The quantum field is, the physical reality is just a small part of the quantum field. And so the quantum field exists everywhere. It exists around us. It exists within us. It's something that the mind can't really grasp, because in that quantum field, there is no time and there is no physical space. And he describes this 3D reality as a construct, something that was created within this quantum field in order to have experience. And that these beings that we talk about, they exist not in a physical reality, they exist in a higher dimensional vibration, and they are consciousness, and they are moving, continuously moving on in learning and processing and evolving.
And as for why there's no memory of consciousness before we're born, that's a fascinating question. And I think it has to do with what Raymond is saying about this reality being like a play. And so it's only going to be an interesting play for your consciousness if you are fully invested. So in a sense...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to add something.
I had a thought of...
Yeah.
Well,
hang on.
The comment that we don't remember that we've been alive before is actually more and more people are actually remembering. And there's many children now that are being born with a complete memory of where they lived in their past lifetime.
And that's part of this whole awakening process.
And again, exactly. As the vibration, as the energy, the consciousness rises, then more and more people will be having that kind of experience.
Yeah.
And really, that's what we're here to share with the Stargate work, is to assist people to raise their vibration.
So I'm interested in what Raymond was going to say about Plato.
Oh yeah, Plato's thought about why we don't remember our past lives was that it had to do with what psychologists called an event boundary, and it's something that everybody has experienced. But what an event boundary has to do with is the fact that your mind puts things into packets for processing, and once you get outside of that little packet, the information may not be accessible to you. And the most common example is when you're in your living room and you think of something you want to get in your kitchen. Then what happens? And of course, what's the first thing that happens when you walk across the kitchen? You forgot what came in there for, right? And Plato said that's how it is, and that some people, he said, drink of the waters of forgetfulness so much that they don't remember anything. But some people don't do that quite as much, so they may have memories leaking through. But it's a good system to have that barrier, because it would be very hard to concentrate on your present life if intrusive memories from your previous life were always coming in and getting you derailed.
Yeah. And perhaps that's
a person
why
like that would be
right. And perhaps that's why it's only when we reach these certain levels of consciousness and intelligence that those start to come back. So yeah.
Well, what I've figured out is I am not Raymond Moody. It's number one, I'm sick of Raymond Moody, and many people in my age listening to this right now will be nodding. Yeah, I understand, because when you get this age, it's like the personality is just gone. Ego equals pain. There's nothing noble about losing your ego. It's like it just comes about naturally, because you just batter yourself so much with ego that eventually it just deserts on its own accord almost. But not Raymond Moody. I'm sick of Raymond Moody. There's some other entity which is indescribable that the Raymond Moody folly is on for some temporary purpose, for some limited reach of time. But I am going to be very disappointed if I go over there and I still have to be Raymond Moody.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take another question. Maybe this will be the last one, we'll see.
Okay. The next question is a couple questions mixed together. People who have had near-death experiences come back into their life with ability to telepathically receive messages or have healing abilities.
Sometimes.
And they're asking, how can this transformation be explained?
I don't know. I've heard people over the years who say that after they came back from this, not exactly telepathy, but they say they have some way that just pick up on what's going on with people in a way that they can't describe. I know of one case of a healer after a near-death experience. So these transformations do occur, and I'm not quite sure why they occur. I think that exposure to a profound altered state of consciousness
We're having trouble hearing you right now, Raymond.
We lost you at profound altered consciousness.
Okay, what about now? Can you hear?
Try turning your camera off, and that sometimes helps.
Okay, how do we do that?
Okay, so we'll have some...
It's gonna help.
If you can just turn the camera off, then that will often help with the sound quality.
Okay.
Looks like we've lost them completely
Yeah, that's
now.
a bummer. I was excited to hear about the... So what I can already imagine what Alcazar would say in response to that question. Should we bring him through? Okay. So, beloveds, this experience of reconnecting beyond the physical boundaries of your reality to your beingness, to that which we would call your higher self and your superconsciousness, allows for a readjustment of your energy field. It can allow for the human being to actually embrace a higher state of consciousness. It is as if you reconnect with the gifts of your beingness whilst you are in that state, which is known as the near-death experience. And so when you are popped back into the body, into this physical reality, there is a broader opening to your beingness which persists. And this is the case with most individuals. It is not always expressed as the healing abilities or the telepathy. It is sometimes, as this one Raymond Moody has said, an invigoration of the pursuit of knowledge or artistry or music. It is a reconnection with your beingness.
Okay, so we see Raymond back again, but I'm not sure if we can hear you. But we're also coming to
It looks like we just lost him.
We're coming to the end of our time anyway. So we'd just like to give you a little bit more information about the series that we are about to create with Raymond. So Jules, can you give us that information?
Yeah, I'd love to. So for those of you who are new to the Stargate experience, we would invite you, if you feel drawn to explore more deeply, you can learn more about the Stargate on our website, thestargateexperience.com. And you can even experience these energy meditations that we mentioned, because it sounds totally crazy and out there. But the beauty of this is that the Stargate's designed to surround you with an energy field that expands your consciousness and lets you have a direct experience. And we are really excited about how this collaboration with Raymond Moody is going to evolve, because essentially Raymond will be bringing a foundation intellectually, rationally, with people's experiences that then we'll be able to build on by creating an energy field with the Stargate and facilitating experiences for everyone who decides to participate.
So you'll actually, in these three-part mini-series, you'll actually be able to experience the energies of the Stargate, the energies of some of these beautiful benevolent beings that we've mentioned, the Pleiadians, the Arcturians, excuse me, coming into where you are. You'll feel their love, their presence. Not only them, however, but we also work with what we call the Ascended Masters, beings like Buddha and Jesus and Mary and Kuan Yin and all the various masters that have existed over the years. They bring their energy into the Stargate work as well.
So essentially this collaboration with Dr. Raymond Moody, first of all, we really are honored that he has trusted us in working with us. And so thank you, Dr. Raymond Moody. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Lisa also. And Lisa and Dr. Raymond Moody are actually going to be starting an online platform in November called the University of Heaven. And it's all about bringing in physicians and other very rational scientific people to talk about this exploration. So I wanted to mention that because they are so excited about it. And Raymond has been saying for a long time, he's really grateful because he's been wanting to be able to sit in his living room and connect with you all for a really long time. So in this series that we're creating together, there will be 3 different 90-minute webinars, and it will be laying a foundation with Raymond sharing first about near-death experiences. The second part will be about shared death experiences. And the third part is actually going to be about grief and grieving, which I think is going to be so helpful and so beautiful. So
Alcazar will be joining Raymond again and bringing a totally different perspective, the perspective from beyond the veil, about how we can bring these things together. And the beautiful thing is that as this scientific approach expands, it gets closer and closer to the so-called spiritual approach, and the two are merging. And that's what's happening. And that's going to bring incredible levels of awareness to individuals, but also, as we've mentioned, that awareness raises the consciousness of humanity as a whole. And more people will then start to broaden their perspective and their view on life, which will enable them to start having experiences as well.
So we want to share the link if you are interested in going deeper into this exploration with us and with Dr. Raymond Moody. We highly encourage you to join us because I'm personally really excited to see what comes through, especially with the energy work, but also with a continuation of it's so wonderful to hear about people's experiences. And it's so validating. And I think it helps us to plug into a kind of intuitive sense of what that might be like.
Yeah.
So we'll have Ashley share the link. And sounds like she has, so you guys can check it out. And
also, we just want to mention that for those of you that have been participating in this live webinar, or those people that are sleeping right now but have signed up for it and are going to be listening in the future, there's how many people? Almost 2,000 people signed up to be part of this. For all of you, we're creating the mini-series of 3 events for a really reduced price of $47. After the event is over, the price is going to be $147.
yeah, so this is something that essentially, as an honoring to you for being part of the co-creation of the event, we're making it greatly reduced price. And then after June 3rd, when the event finishes, it's going to go up to $147 because that's sort of more of a normal price that lets us share it on telesummits and things like that.
So, once again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the mini-series.
Yeah.
And we still would enjoy you typing in your experiences if you wish to continue to add things here. And as we said, we will go through some of the questions and record some answers.
Yeah. And so someone's asking if there will be replays. You'll receive replays for the series that we're doing, which is on June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And you'll also receive a replay of today's webinar. So we invite you to share it with friends if you feel to. Okay.
All right, then. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
So thanks for joining us.